Solving. This is kind of a short chapter. I would apologize. It's kind of short in the textbook as well. There's a lot of debate in the chapter about this theory and that theory. I didn't put the debates in there. I didn't think that was really relevant. But we're going to talk about thinking and problem solving today. This should be interesting. It's about philosophy, and I really like to to argue about philosophy because there are no right answers to that one. But let's go ahead and get started. Thinking is essential in everyday life. People constantly face decisions, big, some small. Historically, thinking was first studied by philosophers and mathematicians in ancient Greece. Already in the 4th century BC, the Greek philosopher Aristotle tried to understand the proper way of thinking and in so doing developed the field of logic. And so logic does exist. It exists in most institutions. Isn't studied as much today as it has been in the past, but it's a classic topic that people deal with, that different schools will deal with. Philosophy and logic are two of the main targets. Theories of logic and probability have been used by psychologists to study thinking. The hypotheses tested in this kind of research focused on whether human thinking follows the laws of logic using research on reasoning and probability using research on decision making. If this is the case, humans would be fully rational, as their behavior would be optimal and could not be improved upon. This approach first solves a problem using logic or probability theory, which provides the correct answer and then compares this to the answers provided by participants not trained in logic or probability. Whether humans are rational is a key scientific question. And it's a huge question, actually, because there are a lot of people that feel that humans are logical. But which humans are they talking about? Are we all logical? Are some people logical and other people not logical? This is one of the things that you have to look at. Much of the field of economics assumes that they are. There is an important line of research at the intersection of psychology and economics, and that's a really strange intersection if you think about it, psychology and economics. It's called behavioral economics, which has shed important light on the question of rationality. Are people rational? And the answer is sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. In addition to research on reasoning and probability, other approaches have been used to study thinking. Research on problem solving is interested in the way participants generate solutions, which typically consist in a sequence of actions. Research on creativity studies the way people come up with novel products and ideas. Research on analogy making is concerned with the extent to which knowledge acquired to solve a certain type of problem can be used to solve other types of problems. Problem solving, the aim of this field of research is to understand the way that people do solve their problems. These problems can be fairly simple puzzles, such as the Tower of Hanoi. This is a children's game. I remember my children had a Tower of Hanoi. We didn't call it the Tower of Hanoi, though. The idea is that you move these discs. You have 3 pegs, and you move these discs, and you need to put them all on the middle peg. But a larger peg can't, or a larger disc can't go on top of a smaller disc. So that's the trick. So you have to keep adjusting them until they're all piled on the B peg. And that's the Tower of Hanoi. They can also be more complex, such as finding the best move in a chess position, diagnosing a patient, or even developing a new theory in science. For example, a new theory of human problem solving, and of course. Now, one of the problems with anything that we're going to talk about today, one of the problems is that they're talking about experiments in a laboratory. They're not talking about you trying to figure out how you're going to get your son or your daughter to basketball practice when you only have one card and you have two practices to go to, and they're in different places. That's a problem, and that's a realistic problem. These are just experiments. These are superficial problems, and that's part of my complaint about this whole field of psychology, is the idea that it's all experimental, and they're saying you're smart and you're not smart because you can't figure out this puzzle. But the reality is, okay, maybe I can't figure out this puzzle, but I can figure out how to get to work in the morning, and you can't. Or, so which one of us is intelligent? That's my problem with this area of inquiry. One of the first approaches that tried to understand problem solving in psychology was behaviorism, which dominated psychology from about 1910 to 1960, in particular in the United States. This is really popular in the United States. We have B.F. Skinner, we have J.B. Watson, and these people were coming up with behavior modification techniques. So they tried to figure out problem solving. How do we solve problems? What's the best way to solve a problem? Just like behavior in general, problem solving was explained by stimulus response links. Behaviorism focused on problem solving with animals, with the assumption that animals' results could be extrapolated to humans. Thorndike in 1898 put hungry cats in a box from which they could escape by pressing a lever. At first, the cats performed all sorts of behaviors to escape. By chance, they sometimes pressed the lever that opened the trapdoor, and they would then gain access to the food, which acted as a reward. As they were repeatedly put in the box, they learned that pressing the lever opened the trapdoor. And this was in 1898. Gestalt psychologists were active from about 1915 to 1945. They were mostly interested in how people solve new problems, what they called productive problem solving. Their key hypothesis was that perception and problem solving involve more than just creating associations, but also involve restructuring, that is, changing the structure of either what is perceived or the problem at hand. This change in structure tends to be sudden, and in the case of problem solving, characterized by a feeling of insight and an aha experience. Another hypothesis was that previous knowledge often hinders problem solving because it makes restructuring and insight harder. And this is known as functional fixedness, a negative influence of knowledge. Mental sets occur when an idea that comes immediately to mind during a familiar problem blocks alternative solutions from being taken into account. I'm sure you've been in a meeting where you're trying to solve a problem and somebody came up with an idea and people couldn't get off this idea, even though this idea didn't seem to work as well as other ideas. Other ideas, people stopped trying to come up with new ideas. And it's one of the reasons why that type of a meeting doesn't really work as well as, what do they call it when everybody's just throwing ideas out there? Well, I can't think of the word right off the top of my head, but and that can be a problem, the fact that other ideas get in the way. Lutyens in 1942 was the first to demonstrate this phenomenon experimentally. Participants were trained on 5 problems that had the same solution as the first problem. They learned the solution quickly. They then received 2 problems that had 2 possible solutions, the same complex solution as in the first 5 problems, and a shorter solution. Only 20% of the participants spotted the simple solutions. The other 80% kept using the more complex solution. And this is really a serious problem. Now remember, this is in 1942. In 1942, World War II was going on. And we were trying to figure out how in the world we were going to defeat the Japanese in the Pacific theater and the Nazi Germans in the European theater. So, this functional fixedness that we had a problem with, and the military has a very serious problem with functional fixedness. If this is the solution, then it will always be the solution. A good example of this would be battleships. Battleships were large dreadnoughts. They were massive ships. But the problem was that after air power came to the fore, battleships weren't all that successful. They had become an anachronism. Now aircraft carriers seemed to carry the day. But of course, naval personnel who were trained, they're like PhDs. You give us a solution to a problem, and we just keep repeating that same solution over and over and over again. Naval admirals had exactly the same problem, and it wasn't just the naval admirals from the United States. It was also naval admirals from Russia, from Germany, from England, from the United States, from Holland, from Spain, from France. All of these individuals thought, well, we need bigger and tougher battleships. But of course, air power could neutralize the battleship and make it obsolete, and that's exactly what happened. So aircraft carriers came to the fore during World War II. Now that we have jets with long-range capabilities, do we need aircraft carriers? And the answer is probably no. They have become an anachronism. And this was a problem during 1942. We were trying to figure out how we were going to. We needed to create docks in France after we invaded Normandy. So how were we going to do that? There were no docks there. The Germans destroyed all the docks that we potentially could have used. So how were we going to do it? And of course, and everybody's going, "Oh, it's impossible! It's impossible! We can't just create docks." And of course, it took somebody who's thinking outside the box, somebody who didn't really understand what the experts were talking about. It took somebody with a creative mind to come up with the answer. Another problem they had during World War II, especially at Normandy, they had what they called hedgerows. And hedgerows were these ancient piles of dirt between the fields, and they had been there for 300-400 years, and bushes had grown on top, and when the bushes grew, they had roots that went way down deep into the soil. So when they tried to break through the hedgerows, they couldn't do it. And of course, by the time they broke through the hedgerow, they couldn't. They tried blowing them up; it didn't work. They tried using a bulldozer. Bulldozers didn't work. They tried using a tank to just roll over them, and it didn't work. It actually flipped it over. That's how tough these things were. So they needed to come up with a solution. The solution was, instead of having a flat blade on the bulldozer, what they needed was one with teeth, so that it would cut into the roots and slice them. And that's exactly what they did. So instead of making all this noise and the Germans knowing exactly where you're coming through the hedgerow, they had this instrument that actually cut through the hedgerow, made an opening so that we could get through. And it took all these engineers were there trying to figure out, well, how are we going to do this? We didn't even think about these hedgerows. We just thought we would roll down the road and everybody would be happy. But that's not the way it worked out in France. So they had to figure out a way to get through the hedgerows, to break through the hedgerows. The explosions didn't work. It blew a hole, but you couldn't get through the hole. These things were like 4 or 5 feet wide, so we needed a way to cut through them, and they came up with the teeth on the front of on the hedgerow. Anyway, or on front of the tank. They put it on a tank, and it just plowed right through them, just like a bulldozer does. It cut right through them like the roots weren't there at all. Anyway, okay, so this is functional fixedness. Problems space theory comes from Herbert Simon's theory of bounded rationality, and that was he wrote that in 1957. Simon argued that humans cannot find the best solutions to most problems because of the limitations of their cognitive system. For example, limited short-term memory capacity. They content themselves with highly selective search and choose options that are good enough but not necessarily optimal. To do so, they have to rely on heuristics, rules of thumb and shortcuts that are efficient, cheap computationally, and work most of the time, but that can fail every so often. Heuristics can be distinguished from algorithms, which always lead to a solution if there is one. Thus, people are satisfiers, not maximizers. Now, this is a problem in today's society because we have people that aren't thinking. We have people that will Google something, and then they will think that whatever Google says is the answer to the question. And if Google doesn't have a good answer to the question, then there is no answer to the question. Well, you can figure things out on your own. The problem is people don't want to figure things out on their own. They don't want to think themselves. They want somebody else to come up with a solution. They think that anyone else's solution is better than their solution. But of course, they're the experts on themselves. They're the experts on where they live. They are the experts on what the problem is. So they should be able to figure out the solution to the problem themselves. But we are losing our ability to do that. We're losing our ability to think, as sad as that is. And of course, that sounds like something for the next for the next class, for 321, for the social media class. But the reality is, we don't think anymore. We don't have to. We can just Google it. We don't have to memorize anything. We don't have to remember anything. We can just Google it. And sometimes Google comes up with the wrong answer. Or there are several answers and none of them fit your problem. Problem space theory, this is according to Newell and Simon in 1956, and then again in 1972, proposes that problem solving is a search through a problem space. The initial state is a starting point of a problem and includes the information given at the beginning. The goal state is the desired end state. To find the solution to a problem, one must link the initial state to the goal state by moving through a number of states, which are created by the application of operators. In many problems, this can be likened to searching through a maze, and that's exactly what we have here. If you have ever tried to figure out how to get through a maze, you've got a starting point and you've got an ending point, and you've got all of these paths that you can take. A lot of times, the easiest way to solve your problem is to go to the end and then work toward the beginning. As weird as that may seem, but that's the way it works. One can distinguish two types of problem spaces. The external problem space, which can be found through task analysis, contains all the possible states in a given problem. While external problem spaces are relatively small for simple problems, they can be very large indeed. For example, there are about 10 to the 120th power possible chess games. That's 10 followed by 120 zeros, which is larger than the number of atoms in the known universe. That's a lot of ways to play a game. Analyzing external problem spaces is useful because they offer normative measures about optimal solutions, and thus they provide information about the difficulty of a problem. The internal problem space is the internal representation that people construct of the problem. It usually includes the representation of the start state, goal state, allowed operators, as well as previous domain-specific knowledge, strong heuristics, and domain general knowledge, weak heuristics. The internal problem space is progressively augmented as search progresses and the problem solver learns more about the problem. The internal problem space is usually much smaller than the external problem space. And this joke is really kind of interesting. So she comes up and he's sitting there on the steps and she says, "Should I ask? I'm locked out and trying to get my roommate to let me in." So I SSH'd into the Mac Mini in the living room and got the speech synth to yell to her for me. "Hey, I'm locked out downstairs." "Ah, I take it the doorbell doesn't work." And of course, the doorbell is a simple solution rather than emailing all this stuff to somebody that's not there. But anyway, that was the simple solution, and they were coming up with a complex solution. It's kind of like this picture. The expert is saying, "Oh, what a funny way to solve this problem. This is the way you really solve it." And actually, there are a lot of areas in this chapter that it look like this. And I just cut that stuff out. I just left it with this. Sorry about that. And those of you who like complex answers to very simple questions, I apologize. Newell and Simon in 1972, and this is Newell and this is Simon, and other researchers demonstrated that participants used identifiable strategies, often means and analysis. They also showed that an analysis of the task environment and its complexity often made it possible to predict the strategies used by the participants and their solution times. This analysis and the generation of external problem spaces made it possible to measure the differences between human participants and an ideal solver. Problem space theory offers a normative theory of problem solving. There's a reason why I don't fix my own cars. For one thing, I don't know anything about cars, so I always take my car to somebody who knows how to fix them. That makes sense to me. I could let it sit there and I could try to solve the problem. And I've done this before with tractors. Tractors are very simple structures. It is about the simplest engine that you can possibly work on. And thinking, come on, this is a simple engine. I should be able to fix it. I've had tractors that sat for years without being fixed. I have one out in the garage right now that my friend fixed for me because he knows how to do it. That just sat there for over a year, and now it runs because he said, "Well, look, your carburetor has accumulated shellac, and the reason it's accumulated shellac is because the gasoline that you use has alcohol in it, and it breaks down some of the components and it creates a shellac, and then it doesn't run. So what you have to do is you have to burn that shellac off about once every 3 weeks. It says if you run your engine about every 3 weeks, it should keep that shellac out. Now, I don't know that much about engines, and I don't know that much about gasoline, so it would have taken me forever to figure that out. Actually, he had to soak the carburetor for about 3 weeks in order to get all the shellac out of it, in order to get it to run. But it sure runs nice now. What am I talking about? I'm talking about experts solving problems. So, if you're talking about a mental illness, you're talking about that kind of a problem, you need to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. If you're talking about a medical problem, you need to go to a doctor. They're the ones that solve these problems. If you're talking about chess, you need to go to a grandmaster, of course. It seems a little weird to me that now that the world has become so complex that we're trying to figure out how problem solving works. Creativity can be seen as a form of problem solving, except the problem to be solved, such as discovering a new law in psychology, are more complex. Wallace in 1926 proposed that creativity involves 4 broad stages. The first stage, preparation, is characterized by conscious attempts to solve the problem, often from multiple directions. With more difficult problems, these attempts are unsuccessful, and one must move to the second stage, which is incubation. The second stage is incubation, or the problem is left aside, but unconscious processing remains active and multiple ideas get combined behind the scenes, so to speak. I don't know if you've ever had a problem that you had to take care of. Sometimes I'll let it marinate in my mind for a number of weeks, a number of months. It didn't work with my tractor. I never did fix my own tractor. Wait a minute, maybe it's shellac in the carburetor. But other problems that I've had, other physical problems, like putting a door on one of the openings in my. We have all these doors in my barn, and we didn't have anything to fill them up with. So I was thinking, well, it would be really nice if that barn was a little bit more airtight. It didn't have all the wind whistling through, because where I live, it's really cold, and the wind blows from the north, and sometimes it blows from the east. And I had open doors on the east side of the barn, and I said to myself, well, I would like to be able to solve that problem. So for a couple of years, of course, I was thinking, well, what in the world, should I make a door? Can I make a door? I looked it up. These doors. This is an old milk barn, so the openings are wider than doors. You can't find a door that is that large. So I looked online trying to find a door that fit, and of course I couldn't find one because it was too wide. It was about a foot and a half short. So what am I going to do? How am I going to fix this? How am I going to fix this? And then I figured. Then finally, I came up with a solution last year. There was an internal door that was exactly the same size, and so I used that on one. There were two openings that I needed to cover, and so I used the internal door, and I just moved it out to the outside. It's not an external door theoretically, but hey, it works. It fits. It closes the opening, and that's really all I care about. So what am I going to do about the other one? Well, what I did about the other one, it's like, what is it, about 3.5 feet wide. What I did, I got a piece of plywood. It's 8 feet tall. The opening is 8 feet tall and 3.5 feet wide. So I got a piece of plywood, which is 10 by 4, I think, or 10 by 5. Anyway, it's big. It was big enough, but so I had to cut it. I had to cut it down, and eventually, of course, I fitted that piece of plywood as if it were a door. It doesn't look as good as the other doors, of course, because they're barn doors, but it certainly covers the opening, and now I'm happy. It's on hinges, so I can open and close it if I need to. Anyway, I've fixed my dilemma, but I had to let it incubate. Okay, so I'm very creative. Yes, I'm not. I wasn't born in 1926, but I finally figured out how to cover the opening on my barn door. It doesn't look, like I said, it doesn't look as good as if it were an actual barn door, but it certainly covers the opening. Incubation. This is followed by the illumination stage, and the illumination hit me about I don't know, about 6 or 8 months ago, and I put up the door in the spring. I put it up. Where the solution comes as a flash of insight, sometimes at an unexpected moment. I can't remember when it happened. I think I was dreaming about it, and I figured it out. The problem was cutting the board, because I really didn't have a saw that worked. But we even figured that out. Finally, there is the verification stage, where there is a conscious and deliberate effort to check the solution. And of course, I'm thinking, yeah, I can cut it. It'll be easy. It wasn't easy. But we figured it out. Analogy making can be defined as the transfer of the solution of one problem to another problem. It is an efficient and sometimes creative reuse of knowledge. Several models have been developed in psychology to explain analogy making. First, an analog or source, for example, a problem similar to the one currently faced, must be retrieved from long-term memory. Second, a mapping should be made between the source and the current or target problem. And this is an analogy. Socks are to feet as gloves are to hands, of course. That's an analogy. So if we were thinking, geez, how am I going to cover my hands up? And we're wearing a pair of socks, we could say, I know, I can put socks on my hands. Actually, cross-country runners very often will wear socks on their hands for some reason. I haven't quite figured that. Now they have running gloves, of course. But in the old days, back in the old days, they didn't have gloves for runners, and people would wear socks. I can remember the... I didn't run cross-country. I ran cross-country in the 8th grade, and then I decided that I was a sprinter. But I can remember my senior year, we went to state, and at sectionals, it was really cold and it was rainy, and it turned to sleet halfway through the race. I'm not running; I'm just watching, and all these guys came running by with socks on their hands. Considerable research has been carried out to establish whether people follow the laws of logic when they think, and if not, how they depart from these laws. This research can be divided into two main topics: deductive reasoning, where the conclusions necessarily follow from the premises, and inductive reasoning, where only probable conclusions can be derived from the available information. Deductive reasoning is a logical approach where you progress from general ideas to specific conclusions. Deductive reasoning, general ideas, specific conclusions. It starts out with a general statement or hypothesis and examines the possibilities to reach a specific logical conclusion. In deductive reasoning, there is a first premise, then a second premise, and finally an inference, a conclusion based on reasoning and evidence. All spiders have 8 legs. A tarantula is a spider. Therefore, tarantulas have 8 legs. For deductive reasoning to be sound, the hypothesis must be correct. It is assumed that the statements all spiders have 8 legs and a tarantula is a spider are true. Therefore, the conclusion is logical and true. In deductive reasoning, if something is true of a class of things in general, it is also true of all members of that class. We went from general to specific. All spiders have 8 legs. A tarantula is a spider. That's the specific. And of course, the conclusion is that a tarantula has 8 legs. Reasoning. A syllogism is a Greek word meaning with reason. Most syllogisms are if-then statements, such as if most birds can fly and wrens are birds, then wrens can fly. That's a syllogism. Of course, both statements have to be true for the third statement to be true. This syllogism dealing with wrens is a modus ponens, reasoning used to affirm a hypothesis. I tried to put an hypothesis, but they wouldn't let me. Grammatically, I guess it's a. So you're trying to affirm a hypothesis. Reasoning used to deny a hypothesis would be a modus tollens. A syllogism that would be a modus tollens would be the dog always barks when there is an intruder. The dog did not bark, then there was no intruder. If the first two statements are true, then the third statement will be true as well. Okay, so we have modus tollens and modus ponens. Modus ponens is to affirm a hypothesis. Modus tollens is to deny a hypothesis. Johnson Laird in 2001 proposed that we create mental models in our minds when reasoning. Mental models assumes that people build an internal representation of the information contained in a problem and then mentally inspect this representation to establish whether it is correct. In particular, they try to find counterexamples that would invalidate an inference. The mental model approach has been predominantly used with syllogisms. Michael won't lend me his car for the weekend. Does that make him a bad friend? And Jonathan, of course, says no. Ching and Holyoake, 1985, proposed a theory based on pragmatic reasoning schemas. These schemas are general and abstract, but less so than logical rules as they are constrained by the satisfaction of a goal. Ching and Holyoake argue that in everyday reasoning, people do not use rules or construct internal representations of the problem at hand, but rather use schemas based on their experience. When it is difficult to apply such a schema as in an abstract problem, then people tend to make mistakes. So what are we talking about here? What we're talking about is if we were trying to solve a problem, we would come up with visions of possibilities, as long as the problem isn't too abstract. If we're talking about fixing my tractor, then what I am focusing on is would be all the parts of the tractor. I'm visualizing those parts of the tractor. That's a possibility. But if I'm trying to solve a problem like my daughter needs to go to a meeting on Friday, and I need to take care of my grandson. How am I going to get there? I would probably. This is more of an abstract problem. I'll tell you what a problem. I'll tell you about an abstract problem. My dog died. Was killed by a pack of coyotes a couple weeks ago, and both my daughter and my grandson were really attached to this dog. So we were worried about grief. We were worried that if we told them before. He had a soccer tournament last weekend, and we were afraid that if we told him before the soccer tournament that he would be so brokenhearted that he wouldn't play very well, and we didn't want that to happen. So we didn't tell him. We didn't tell my grandson. We didn't tell my daughter. And then finally on Tuesday, I told them, and they weren't nearly as attached to the dog as I thought they were. So that was an abstract problem. That was I was worried that they would get real upset about the dog dying, but as it turned out, of course, it didn't happen. With inductive reasoning, it is possible to reach only probable conclusions from the given information. Thus, with induction, the conclusions must go beyond the information given. There's more uncertainty than with deduction, and indeed no guarantee that the conclusions that are reached are correct. Inductive reasoning is a method of drawing conclusions by going from the specific to the general. Inductive reasoning is also called inductive logic or bottom-up reasoning. Cheap medications A and B both cause major side effects. All observed cheap medications cause major side effects. All cheap medications cause major side effects. Okay. In May, this is an example of inductive reasoning. In May, a family moved to my hometown from Kentucky, and they all had red hair. In September, another family from Kentucky moved to my hometown, and they all had red hair. All people from Kentucky must have red hair. Well, that's inductive reasoning. It's a pretty flawed reasoning, just because two families don't make an example. But hey, that's part of our problem, isn't it? Drawing inferences from too few examples. Expected utility is a field of research that is interested in decision-making under uncertainty, the way people make decisions with only imperfect information. This is the case for most decisions, those made in everyday life, those made by scientists, and those made by politicians. One influential approach to explain this type of decision-making, used not only in psychology but also in economics, is to assume that people, perhaps unconsciously, use all the available information in order to make an optimal decision. The problem is they don't have enough information. According to this view, people are maximizers. They always select the optimal option. They attach a utility, for example, a value, to each outcome and assess the probability that this outcome will occur. By multiplying the utility of each outcome by its probability and taking the sum over all possible outcomes, one gets the expected utility of an option. The same procedure is applied to all options. This is how they come up with weather reports. This is how they come up with economic reports. Right now we are in, inflation is pretty high. And one of the things that has to happen in order to control inflation is that the Fed has to decide what the interest rate for government loans are going to be. Now, we're just talking about government loans, and not everybody has a government loan. But the Fed has to decide how much um, how much interest they're going to pay on Treasury bills, and that will dictate, because all these banks own Treasury bills. This is part of how where their money comes from. So they have to decide what interest rate they're going to pay, and based on that interest rate, they will come up with the interest rate you have to pay for a loan. If you buy a car, you have to pay whatever it is. Interest rates are going up, and that looks like it's going to cause a recession. People will stop buying. Money will be worth more money because the interest rates are high, and um, things will cost a lot more money. The interest rates will go up. And this will cause inflation. Inflation means the dollar will be worth more money, therefore we'll have fewer dollars. It gets really complicated. But the problem is that the Fed has to come up with their decision as to how much the interest rates are going to be, how much the dollar is going to be worth based on the information that they have. And they don't always have a lot of good information or complete information. And that's how they come up with these decisions. And sometimes they guess wrong. They didn't have enough information, and they assumed that this is what was going to happen, but something else happened. One of the things that's driving the recession, not only here but also in Europe, is oil prices. Oil prices are going to go up. One of the reasons oil prices are going up is because Russia has taken all their oil off the market. And because of that, there's less oil to be had. Europe needs oil, China needs oil, Africa needs oil, the Western world, the United States and South America need oil. Everybody needs oil, but there is less oil to be had. So we'll all have to pay higher prices for them. And this is being driven because the Russians have taken oil off. They have taken their oil off the market. They've stopped selling to Europe. People have stopped buying from them. And the other problem is that OPEC has just decided that they're going to reduce the amount of oil that is available by 2 million barrels a day. So they're raising the price of oil in essence. So what am I talking about? Expected utility, and not having enough information to gauge this by. Statistics show that flying is much safer than traveling by car. You are 10,000 times less likely to die in a plane accident than in a car accident. However, people generally think that traveling by car is safer. How can that be? Kahneman and Tversky in 1973 explained this with the availability heuristic, which consists in basing one's estimate of probability on how easy it is to retrieve examples from long-term memory. Typically, there are few casualties in car accidents. By contrast, there are many deaths in airplane crash, and the accident is widely covered in the news with horrific pictures. As a consequence, more details are stored in long-term memory, which makes retrieval of plane accidents much easier than car accidents. Normally, we don't get to see the result of a plane accident, but airplane crashes, well, actually, there aren't that many airplane crashes. But when is one, they go, oh, 53 people died in this airplane crash. 273 people died in this airplane crash. The driver of this car and the driver of the other car died in this car crash. Wow, that's a good one. My goodness. We should try to base our decisions on a large sample of instances and be wary of conclusions based on small samples. However, people very often do the opposite. A classic example is the gambler's fallacy, where a player believes that if, for example, a fair coin has landed 3 times on heads and 10 times on tails, it is more likely to land on heads in the coming tosses, so that the number of heads and tails will even themselves out. The gambler's fallacy is an instance of the representativeness heuristic, where people make decisions on probability by retrieving from long-term memory instances that are similar to the problem at hand. Now, the reality is that when you flip a coin, it has a 50-50 chance of being a heads, it has a 50-50 chance of being a tails. And every time you flip it, it's exactly the same. It's 50-50. So just because it has come up tails, the first 25 times doesn't mean it's going to come up heads. It still has a 50-50 chance of being one or the other. No matter, eventually, of course, if you flip it 100 times, then it should be 50 and 50. But the reality may be it could be 100 and 0, because every time you have a 50-50 chance. Every time somebody gets pregnant, they have a 50-50 chance of having a boy or having a girl. Actually, it's a little bit different than that, because most sperm are male, but we won't go into that. 49% of all babies born are female, and 51% of all babies born are male. But, so you're going to have 100 babies to see if you get 51 and 49. It probably wouldn't work out that way. It all has to do with health of the father. He's the one that determines whether it's a male or female anyway. Popular way of characterizing thinking is to propose that the cognitive system consists of 2 kinds of cognition. The first evolved early and is thus shared by many animals. It is based on perception and learning is intuitive. It operates automatically and with little effort and uses simple heuristics. The second kind of cognition is newer, evolutionarily uniquely human, and is characterized by analytical and rule-based thinking that requires attention and effort. It is slow and deliberative and highly sensitive to experimental manipulations of working memory and time pressure. It also correlates with intelligence. So your second type of thinking is what gives you, is the intelligence that they measure. But the reality is that your first type of cognition is just as important to you. It's actually street smarts. And you can't, it's really difficult to measure experimentally. Now, this is a problem because when we have psychologists and the psychologists want to measure things, this is very difficult to measure. It's almost impossible for them to measure your this type of intelligence. So how can they tell you that you're, these are psychometricians. How can they tell you that you're this kind of intelligent, that you're really intelligent? I have a brother with an IQ that's like 20 points higher than mine. Does that make him smarter than me? He flunked out of every school he's ever been in, despite his vast intelligence. And I have 3 advanced degrees. So my point is that maybe you can't really measure intelligence. Maybe this intelligence is totally superficial and doesn't really mean anything. That's something to think about. This is something I've been arguing about for a long time. Intelligence, not because my brother has an IQ so much higher than everybody else's, and he's the most impractical person in the world, but because it has always bothered me that IQ tests are timed. intelligence has nothing to do with I need to do this right away. I have to be smart really fast. That just doesn't make any sense. It's never made any sense to me that anything should be, that tests should be timed. And it's one of the reasons I present. And I don't test you guys to find out if you know, if you have that knowledge or not. The reason I give you these tests, and don't tell the education people this, but the reason I give you these tests is so that you learn this information. I use that as a teaching tool, not as a testing tool. I the way I don't really test you at all, except in your discussions. I'm looking for you to. I want to find out how you think. I want you to think, and that is what I consider intelligence. So my tests are just as a review of the material. That's what I want. The more you see this material, the more likely it will stick in your long-term memory. So if you listen to my lectures, maybe you read the PowerPoint or look at the textbook, whatever. But this gives you a second shot at this information. And I only test you over what I think you need to know. So I don't know. Maybe I'm going against knowledge or something. I just want you to retain this information. That's all I want you to do. I only have a couple more slides. Evans's 2006 theory provides a good example of this dual approach in the field of reasoning. It proposes that heuristics are implemented in System 1 and analytical processes in System 2. When a reasoning problem is encountered, System 1 rapidly constructs a mental model using simple heuristics. Only then does System 2 enter the picture to possibly revise or even replace the original mental model using deliberate and slow analytical processes. Which system is engaged is affected by a number of factors, including the amount of time available to provide an answer and the level of intelligence of the participants. And of course, that is the point. If you do everything by gut instinct, you're going to miss more than any. You're going to miss a lot of questions, which really bugged me about Donald Trump, because he said his gut was more intelligent than most people's brains. He actually said that in a lecture one, or in one of his presentations one time. His gut is more intelligent than most people's brains, than experts' brains, I think is what he said. And of course, yeah, the reality is you're going by your gut, but your guts isn't getting it right very often. Not all that often anyway. Little irritating. If he understood what he had just said, then he probably wouldn't have said it. And that is the end, actually. I guess that's done. There's only 29 slides. So, okay, I'll talk to you guys next week. I can't remember what the topic is next week. I'm sure it'll be just as much fun as thinking and problem solving.